Hey, hello, how's it going? Welcome back to another Dark and Darker video. If you're here for super cool and fun gameplay footage, I'm sorry to say this is not going to be one of those videos. We're gonna talk. We're gonna use our words. We're gonna talk a little bit about the game itself. As you can see, I prepared a PowerPoint for you today, and this video is 5 things that I think would make Dark and Darker better. By me. Hello. Now, if you are unfamiliar with Dark and Darker, it's kind of weird that you're watching this video. What are you doing here? You should probably go, I don't know, play the game first, or maybe watch people play the game, and then maybe you can have more of an opinion about this, I suppose. But if you don't know how the game works, it's kind of weird that you're here. But we'll go through it real quick. It's a really good game about going into a dungeon, doing a bunch of murders, and then getting your money up. That's the whole idea. An extraction looter shooter meets first person sword fighting game. So, Escape from Tarkov meets Mordhau, or Chivalry, or the Cycle Frontier, whatever games you want to insert there instead of those two. Those are the two I think most popular of their genre, probably. I think Mordhau is more popular than Chivalry at this point, right? Maybe, I don't know. Anyway, thematically though, the game is very similar to something more like Dungeons and Dragons or a classic tabletop RPG game, right? Uh, is the game good? Yes. Dark and Darker is a very good game, but I think just because a game is good does not mean it is immune from criticism, and it does not mean it is immune to becoming an even better game, right? Which is why we're here right now. That's why we're here. It's a game that is very good, but I have a couple of ideas, and maybe this is a little arrogant of me. I think my ideas might make the game a tiny bit better. So that's what we're here to talk about. Now, idea number one that I have is events. On August 11th, Iron Mace introduced the very first weekend event. I guess if you don't know, Iron Mace are the developers who make Dark and Darker. In this event, the anti-cost of the High Roller dungeons was reduced from 100 gold to 50 gold. Generally speaking, not a very exciting event. You know, I'm sure people played the High Roller dungeons more, but just in general, not that interesting of an event. But to me, the concept of events in Dark and Darker is very exciting, right? There's two different ways that I can see events being handled. The first of which is just this general idea of weekend events, right? Fun, minor changes to the game with generally low impact on how the game is played and how the game's economy functions. It can include things like mobs being in strange locations, right? Like, oh no, the goblins have infested the Howling Crypts, and now there's a bunch of, goblin archers and goblin warriors in the crypts instead of what's, normally there, right? You can also do things like modifying drop rate slightly as well. Oh, maybe for this weekend, skeleton champions have like a 3% chance of dropping a golden key instead of a 1% or whatever the actual numbers are. I don't know what they are. I'm just making them up right now. But that's another good idea for a weekend event. You can, make slight adjustments to drop tables, make some items that were rare a little bit more common. It's really important though that you strike a balance here with events like this. If items are too common, right? Let's say for example, every skeleton champion drops a golden key, right? The economy goes fucking crazy. Everything goes out of whack, right? If you do something like that. Also, if you do something like that, the people who were not there for that weekend, let's say, I went on a vacation that weekend and I couldn't play Dark and Darker, and now everyone has 400 golden keys and I'm shit out of luck. So it's very important that you strike a balance with this style of event. It can't be too high impact, right? But you can do cool, fun little things to the game during events like this, right? And then we have event style 2, which is I'm just stealing from old school RuneScape, and I'm just calling them leagues for now, right? If you're not familiar, old school RuneScape, it's an MMORPG based on, grinding a million billion hours to get a 3% increase in your damage. This game does something called leagues. There's no exact schedule for it, but every year-ish or so, they will do a league which will last several months and will have extremely drastic changes to the way the game is played. For example, they had a league called Trailblazer League, where sections of the map were partitioned off, and you could unlock them one by one, only to a maximum of, oh man, I want to say it was like 4 regions out of like the 9 maximum you can unlock. So, but anyway, the point being is that it drastically changed the way the game was played, added a lot of various modifiers to how the game was. I think generally leagues have like huge experience rate increases. So normally, for example, right, getting a maximum attack stat would maybe take you, I don't know, I'm just pulling this out of my head, 200 to 300 hours of grinding basic mobs or whatever to get your attack that high, right? And then in leagues, it would be maybe 10 hours, right? It would be drastic increases to experience gains, et cetera, so on and so forth, right? Huge sweeping changes to how the game is played during these leagues. However, these leagues have no impact on the normal old school RuneScape game. You would have effectively a separate account for RuneScape leagues, and every all the progress you made on those accounts was was entirely isolated. The economy is entirely isolated. Everything's separate, basically, right? The only real thing you got out of doing a RuneScape league was cosmetics, which are cool, which are fun. Gamers love dripping themselves out, so it's a good way to introduce cosmetics to the game, right? Achievement-based cosmetics is very cool. Dark and Darker already has a leaderboard system in it, and I imagine that would be very compatible with a league-style event system, right? Um, beyond and also just beyond that, you can have cosmetic rewards for just various accomplishments, right? Let's say you have one, for killing a hell boss 10 times, right? If you kill the hell bosses during the league 10 times, you get a reskin for your torch, or you get a reskin for long swords, or whatever, right? You get the idea. You can have leaderboard based achievements, and you can just have general gameplay achievements at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. Anyway, here's my example of what I would consider to be like a Dark and Darker league, or one, like, just a rough draft of one, basically, right? So pretty much same leaderboard system, right? You'd have a league. It would go for maybe, and also it's one thing that's important to note here too. The time frame for this would have to be a lot shorter than the RuneScape leagues. RuneScape leagues, I think I said it before, generally last 2 to 3 ish months, is my understanding. Dark and Darker, the plan is for a wipe to be 2 to 3 months, I believe. So it'd have to be a shorter time frame for these, but I think it's very much still doable. But anyway, so you'd have a leaderboard system similar to the current one, where you'd have, like, your league high roller board, where it's like, kills in high roller dungeons in the league, et cetera, so on and so forth, right? You'd have separate character slots and separate dungeon queues for the league. And then also the characters in the league can only trade with other characters, pretty much just to keep the economy, keep the game split from each other, right? You don't want things that are happening in the league to have an impact on things happening in the normal game. And then for this specific event, right? Those would be for pretty much every event, but for this specific event that I'm coming up with here hypothetically, you would just have like extremely jacked up rare item drops. Basically, at least my thought was, and this is something that happens in Tarkov too, before wipes happen, right? Players hoard all of their very good gear. Something that everyone pretty much does in the game. They hoard all their very good gear, and then the last day before the wipe happened, when I was playing at least, every single person I saw was super decked out in super expensive gear. And it was a lot of fun to play, because you don't get very many chances to be super kitted out and fighting against other, like, full lobbies of kitted out players. And it was really cool, and it was really neat. And I think a league based around high-end gear combat would be cool. So I think a league where, item rarity is just, like, out the window, and just like everyone is kitted, I think is a cool concept. But a little simple. It's a little simple. You can obviously do more with the concept than this, but this is just like a first draft, right? I think it would be cool. And you can have like a leaderboard based on how well these players do when everyone is geared, right? I just think it's interesting. Anyway. What are the pros and cons to both systems here, right? Just writing it out here for the weekend events. Pros, pretty easy to come up with ideas, and it just adds a little bit of variety to the game, right? There's infinite numbers of things you can tweak in the game, right? You can make tiny adjustments to drop rates. You can make tiny adjustments to spawns, right? there's very easy ways to just do small changes to the game. But the cons of this is that if you ever mess up, and if you ever make something too easy to find, let's say for example, that 3% drop rate on golden keys drops or crashes the market for golden keys now, right? So it's hard to it can be a little hard to balance. It can be sneakily hard to balance, I think, sometimes, right? Um, and another thing too is that if there's an expectation that every weekend has a weekend event, there's going to be an expectation that you don't repeat them very often. And if you do just constantly, if every weekend, for example, is lower ante, high roller cost, right? That'll get pretty boring pretty quickly. There's an expectation to have a lot of variety if you are doing weekend events every weekend. For the league events, the pros, there's a lot more room for creativity without the risk of impact on the main game, right? If what you're doing is entirely separate from the main game, there's no worry about, oh, if we do this, it'll ruin everything in the main game, right? So that's out the window. You don't have to worry about that at all. And I just think giving players the chance to earn cosmetics is a cool thing. You can obviously do that with weekend events too, right? You can have a weekend event where it's just the game is completely normal, but if you as the player are able to kill the lich, you unlock a cosmetic permanently, right? You can do that as well. That is an option for weekend events too, but I think generally the concept works better for league events. But whatever, either way. The cons of this are FOMO for said drip. Generally speaking, fear of missing out. I prefer games to do this as little as possible, and I do feel like especially if a leagues for Dark and Darker. Let's say for example, if a wipe is every 3 months, I imagine a league would be a league would be about a 2 week long ish period. In that 3 month wipe, I imagine that not every player will be able to do everything in a league within a 2 week time frame, right? So I don't like the idea of people missing items and then never being able to unlock them. It is unfortunate, and it does lead to unhealthy gameplay behaviors from players, generally speaking. But this is pros and cons, right? There are there's trade-offs here. So if there's a little bit of FOMO, it's not the end of the world. There is also the concept of players not wanting to play leagues because they're not making progress on their main accounts, right? That is a thing as well that needs to be taken into account. I imagine if these leagues are done near the end of a wipe, it's not gonna be that big of a deal. People aren't gonna be that upset about missing out progress on their main account, because I imagine most players by the end of a wipe probably have their max out levels on most of their characters that they're playing regularly, things like that. They probably are not going to be too upset that the rewards that are earning in the league are not being directly put onto their main accounts, but whatever. Also, an important thing too about this is that if you have all this developer time invested in making a league, and then people don't like the league, it's going to be a huge whiff, right? If you make a bad league, people are just gonna, it's gonna be a waste of their time. It's gonna be a waste of your time. When these don't work, they're gonna really feel bad. As opposed to a weekend event where it's just like, oh, well, this weekend event was kind of boring. They put goblins in the crypts, and we don't like that. But whatever, they're gonna be gone in a couple days. Who cares, right? So those are the pros and cons there. If you're asking me personally, I lean more towards the league events because they can often be really cool. And the fact that the more room for creativity, I think, is very important when it comes to these events, right? Making them more unique and more impactful is really good. But, whatever. I imagine weekend events will be will be easier to do, not more easier. Bad words. Anyway, up next, idea number 2 that I have for the game: high roller exclusive mining material. Right now, in the game, there are 2 mining node types. There is cobalt and there is ruby silver. They are both used for crafting various armors in the game. To me, at least, it makes sense that there should be an ore that can only be found in high rollers. Cobalt and ruby silver, for the record, both can be found in normal and high roller dungeons. I believe, generally speaking, in high roller dungeons, ruby silver is more common than cobalt, but you can find them both in both dungeon types. So, and Ruby Silver, for the record, also, if you don't know, more valuable than Cobalt. Ruby Silver is the rarer of the two nodes. Um, I also think, as a slight little aside here too, that if they do add a third crafting material, I think that they should make this rarer crafting material. I think it should be specifically for weapons only. Generally speaking, for most characters, your weapon is your most impactful piece of gear. It has the most impact on how you will survive a dungeon. Right? Having a good weapon and bad armor is generally better than having good armor and a bad weapon. Right? Your weapons are extremely important, so it makes sense from a balance perspective to have the super rare mining resource also be attached to your weapons, right? I think they could be equivalent in like strength to ruby silver, but it can just be rarer and harder to find and things like that. I think that would make sense to me. Also, I think we should get rid of cobalt in the high rollers. Just a quick aside: we don't need cobalt in the high roller dungeons. There's plenty of it in the normal dungeons. We don't need that. Anyway, up next, up next, new weapons. Yeah, also not a crazy idea. It's something that the developers are probably gonna just end up doing anyway at some point. Uh, More weapon variety is good, and there's a few fantasy weapon tropes that are just not at all in the game really. There's maces, but there's no clubs. There's no like one-handed warhammers. I know that the war maul does exist, but we're talking about like just like a warhammer or a war pike, things like that basically, right? There's no katanas for the weebs out there. There are long swords, but long swords aren't really like you got claymores, you got bastard swords, things like that. Long sword doesn't quite fit into that either. You got Zweihanders too, but Zweihanders are sort of like maybe they're technically a claymore. I don't know, but I think that you can have some more sword variety is what I'm trying to say here, especially with bigger swords too. You got no javelins. Javelins would be a great throwing weapon. Right now, you have throwing knives and throwing axes. I don't see why we can't have javelins in the game. I think it'd be pretty cool. And we want to get a little wild with it, a little custom. I think scythes could be on the table. Scythe would be a pretty cool weapon for like especially warlocks to have. If we want to go really crazy with it, why not? Why not black powder weapons? Why not like a flintlock pistol or something like that? Maybe. I think that'd be pretty cool. Why not like a grenade, like a bomb? You have some options there as well that I think would be pretty interesting. And I don't think it's that crazy. A lot of tabletop RPG games have guns in them, so it's not that outside of the realm for a Dungeons and Dragons inspired game to have a little, little more sauce on there in the weapons. Obviously, the more weapons you add to the game, the harder balance becomes. But I think there's room for some more weapons still. I think we can, if we can have like 4 different daggers. I think we can have 4 different one-handed swords. But I don't know. Give me a rune scimitar, please. Up next, expand the warlock spell list, please. Now, this again, listen, these are very surface level and obvious ideas here at this point, right? This is a no-brainer. The warlock literally says work in progress on the class list, so it makes sense that they're going to be adding more spells to the spell list soon. And I might maybe just put this in as some filler just to make the video 5 ideas instead of 4 ideas, but all that being said, I do think it is important to talk about one specific spell that the Warlock should have, and that is Eldritch Blast. If you're not familiar with tabletop RPG games, Eldritch Blast is probably the single most iconic Warlock spell in Dungeons and Dragons. It's very important for Warlocks. They have a lot of class features revolving around their Eldritch Blast, and the fact that the Eldritch Blast doesn't really exist in Dark and Darker is sad. It also fills out their kit really well, because right now, at least in Warlocks, they're pretty good at close quarters combat, right, with Blow of Corruption. They are decent at like mid-range combat with Curse of Pain, Curse of Agony, whatever it's called. Right, they're good at stuff like that, but they do lack long-range capabilities. And not for the record, not every character has to be good at long-range combat, but it makes sense for Warlocks to be good at it because of Eldritch Blast. Basically, if you're not familiar, we can put the picture up here. It's the Yu Yu Hakusho spirit gun. Basically, you just take your hand and you make a gun and you go boom and you shoot a laser. Not literally, but that is what warlocks basically do in D&D all the damn time. Beyond that, it's hard to. I don't have much of an opinion on what other spells warlocks should have. Dark and Darker already kind of strays from the source material quite a bit by making warlocks these sort of blood mage style characters where they sacrifice health to cast spells. Warlocks normally don't do that in D&D, so it's hard to say what else you should do with warlocks. They generally have a very small and weird spell list in most games. So, you know, Eldritch Blast is really the big one. And also it gives them long range capabilities too, which would be nice for the class to have. Yeah. Up next, and I guess up last, I think that we should clean up the item modifiers a little bit. Look at this longsword. I literally went into the trade market, looked up legendary fighter gear, and this took me 3 seconds to find. Someone, oh god, sorry. Some poor man trying to sell his fantastic legendary longsword, except he's having so much trouble because all of the modifiers on it suck. Not literally all of them. Action speed is actually a pretty good modifier usually. Max health is obviously not terrible to have, but there are so many item modifiers in this game that are just like little to literal no impact on your weapon or your armor or whatever. So many of them are just really not good, right? Why is it possible for a double axe to have +2 magic power when the only class that can use a double axe is a barbarian, and the barbarian has literally no magic power scaling at all whatsoever? They have no abilities that use magic power. It's very weird. It's not a good system, and I don't see why we wouldn't just make it so that way characters that can't roll certain abilities, their gear just, or why don't we just make it so that characters that can't use certain abilities can't roll those abilities on their class-specific items, right? For a longsword should have magic power because warlocks can use them, right? It makes sense that warlocks can use that ability, therefore this item should have this ability, right? But why does a double axe have magic power? It just doesn't make any sense, and I would like modifiers to be cleaned up in general. There's probably just a lot of bloat in general too. There's like physical damage % increases, and then there's also physical power increases, and there's flat damage increases. I'm not saying we can't have those. I just think it would be probably overall better to simplify it a little bit. And then also the abilities that have little impact, you know, things like item switch speed, things like that. Why don't we just crank those up so they're actually impactful, right? Do you think, honest to God, do you think if a piece of armor, a piece of chest armor, had a 50% item equip speed increase, you think that would be broken? Because in my head, I would be like, you know, that's not terrible, but I don't think it would be broken either, right? And instead, we're dealing with a sword here that gives you 3% item equip speed, which also, I don't even know if that actually impacts you, because when you switch, do you still have the buff? I don't know. But anyway, the point being is that I think item modifiers are in a really weird place right now, and I think they could definitely be cleaned up a little. Anyway, that's it. We're done. I forgot to put in an end slide, so you know what? The video's over. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you did enjoy this. Hopefully, you know what? Hold on real quick. Let me just one more slide. Oh, can I add it? There we go. Add a slide. New slide. The end. Lol. There you go. The end. It's over. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully I will see you for the next one. I'm sorry it wasn't like cool Dark and Darker gameplay, but hopefully, and you know what? Hold on. Oh, yeah, hold on. What do you think would make the game better? Leave a comment, coward. There you go. Anyway, that's it. Goodbye. The video's over. I'm fucking done.